receiving it. My pleasure.
And that incident is under investigation.
Delighted to say that Rebecca Clancy from The Times is with us now. And Rebecca, as mentioned, it's still really under investigation because Mercedes are not going to let this lie before this weekend.
No, they're not. Hi, Will. It very much is under investigation. Well, Mercedes have launched what is called a request to review, which means at the time of that incident that you just heard, the stewards decided it was noted immediately because obviously it looked as if Verstappen had pushed Hamilton wide off the track at turn 4. They noted it and they looked at the footage that they had available to them at that time, and they decided that they wouldn't investigate any further. Since then, the key piece of footage that was required was Verstappen's onboard, which wasn't available on Sunday during the race for the stewards. That became available on Tuesday, and a few hours later, Mercedes decided to launch their request to review. And all that really means is that they put forward their case with the onboard footage and to say that they would like the incident looked at again. Now, for the review to be accepted by the stewards, the FIA, there has to be what is deemed new and significant new evidence. Now, the onboard would obviously seem to be new, that's definitely unquestionable, but whether or not it is significant, and that's the key part here. So yes, I'm frantically refreshing my emails at the moment to try and find out if the review has been accepted, and if it is accepted, then the FIA, the sports governing body, they will reopen the case into the incident, and it is possible that Verstappen could receive a penalty of some kind if they deem that he was at fault when the investigation is reopened.
Yeah, because Mercedes were quite determined at the time, as we even heard on the check. And these checks often happen with the officials. It's the joy of having the radio coverage when you're watching the Grand Prix take place. But they're very clearly kind of saying, look, Hamilton's been punished before. You got to go and have a proper look at this.
Yeah, I mean, you probably heard the sarcasm in that radio message from Jonathan Wheatley, that was the Red Bull sporting director, to Michael Massey, who is the FIA race director. And Jonathan Wheatley saying, just let them race, it's hard racing. You know, it's what most of us want to see, to be honest. But there are precedents where hard racing isn't allowed anymore. We saw it in Austria with Lando Norris and Sergio Perez. Less of an incident, Lando Norris was deemed to have pushed Perez wide. Norris himself didn't actually leave the track, but he was given a 5-second penalty. Perez then did almost an identical thing to Charles Leclerc of Ferrari, pushed him wide, got a 5-second penalty. I've actually just been speaking to Lando Norris now, and he said there isn't really much consistency on that front. And the drivers really, they have a meeting every Friday before a race, and he plans to go into that meeting on Friday to say, look, what's the rule? Can we hard race, or are we going to be punished if something happens to this degree, if we are deemed to have pushed someone off track? And made the point that just because they're championship leaders, they're the protagonists in this title fight. Max Verstappen's lead is only 14 points at the moment with three races remaining. Does that mean that he gets away with doing something that maybe other drivers who are fighting for 7th or 8th, which in the constructors' title is still worth millions of pounds to each team? It's so still as valuable to them, but they get penalised, but the title riders don't. So there's a bit of inconsistency, maybe the sense of feeling between the drivers there. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. And yes, as we say, we're just waiting for an answer now.
Such a key dramatic moment within the race itself too, because Lewis Hamilton's having to fight back after a weekend of adversity, really, having not been able to qualify, goes into the sprint race, performs remarkably well, noteworthy how good the car was during that too, and then during the race itself he has to fight from 10th place to get into a position to try and overtake Max Verstappen. I'm sure Verstappen would have been more than happy, given his lead, to push him entirely off the track. He had every reason to do so.
Yeah, I mean, as you said earlier, Toto Wolff, the Mercedes team principal, wasn't very happy. He felt like that Mercedes had been targeted all weekend. So Lewis Hamilton was fastest over what is qualifying on the Friday night when there's a sprint race. He was stripped of that because there was deemed to be an issue with his rear wing. Then Mercedes found out that that Red Bull had changed their rear wing, but they hadn't been allowed to do so. Now Mercedes were disqualified from the result for a 0.2 millimetre infraction on their what is called their drag reduction system. So they felt very hard done by. And then heading into the race weekend anyway, we knew that Lewis Hamilton was taking a 5-place grid penalty. So over the course of the Saturday sprint race and the Sunday main race, he effectively had a 25-place grid penalty. So the fact that he came back and won, there's been lots of quotes saying in the face of adversity, that's when you face your biggest challenge, and it makes it all the sweeter. They said the winning made it all sweeter because of what they'd been through. And so he felt very targeted. So now that they've come out, it wasn't a surprise to anybody that Mercedes put forward this challenge, because Toto Wolff said after Sunday night that diplomacy is over. So quite strong words. And as we know, the fight off track between Christian Horner and between the Red Bull team principal and Toto Wolff it's going great guns, just as much as their drivers.
And it shifts the title race so much for Mercedes too. They were saying initially that it was hope, and now it's belief that they can possibly reel in that car and also reel in Verstappen himself over the last 3 races, because what Hamilton did, of the 101 Grand Prix wins that he's had, the last 2 weeks have been really impressive. To finish in second place in Mexico, where it appeared that he was entirely up against it, and where everything felt like it was against Mercedes after their punishment last weekend. Like, even there was, I think, the line on the radio during the qualifying, which was, F the rest of them, we're going to do this for ourselves. It's almost like a backs against the wall situation that Hamilton had found himself in, and he's performed remarkably well over the last 2 races.
Yeah, I've been covering the sport for 5 years now, and it's certainly not the first time I've seen Lewis Hamilton up against it. And if people are being derogatory or if they're bringing the fights to him, he seems to come out much stronger than perhaps maybe the rest of us would respond. And he's come out swinging. And the performance in last weekend in Brazil was phenomenally brilliant. And a lot of people are saying now, that Mercedes is just faster. We are now at 2 tracks. I'm currently in Qatar in what looks like a broom cupboard. But we don't know this track. It's our first time we've ever been here. Then we go to Saudi Arabia. We don't know that track. We've never been there. So there's quite a lot of uncertainty still in this season. So it will be interesting to see how the title plays out. But that Mercedes was rapid in Brazil, and it was expected to be a Red Bull track. And so the fact that Hamilton passed Verstappen with 12 laps remaining, and he still finished more than 6, I think it was even 10 seconds up the road. So that was quite a big gap. And so it will be really interesting to see what happens here. And if Verstappen is given a penalty, the options are either he's given a 5-second penalty, which would be added on to Brazil, which would drop him down to 3rd. So that's the equivalent of 3 points. And 3-point swing at this point is huge. So obviously, to do the quick maths, it would cut his lead in the championship to 11 points. But for Mercedes, it's actually a 6-point swing in their Constructors' Championship, which they only lead at the moment by 11 points over Red Bull. So that would extend it out to 16. So that's 17, sorry. So that's quite a big deal for them. So it's just so nip and tuck at the moment, and every point is so crucial. Yeah,
because there was a lot of people doing up the permutations after Mexico, and the feeling was that this was a Red Bull track in Sao Paulo, and if Verstappen was to win, he would just need second place finishes around this Gulf turn, and he's champion for the first time. It's a remarkable turnaround, and it adds so much drama. I think what adds to drama too, it genuinely feels very embittered now between Red Bull and Mercedes going into this weekend.
Yeah, we've never seen Mercedes in this position before. They've dominated this hybrid era since 2014. They've won both championships for the last 7 years. Ferrari had a bit of a flirt when 2017, 2018, and they looked like they might bring the fight, but they ultimately imploded and they fell away, and the challenge was never really there. But this is the first time in so long we are seeing two teams really go up against each other. And it's been brilliant because Red Bull are obviously the champions from 2010 to 2013. They won for those 4 years. Mercedes came in, they stole their crown, and Red Bull wants it back. And Christian Horner and Toto Wolff couldn't be more different in their personalities. They respect each other professionally, of course they do. But there's definitely friction, and it is definitely getting better.
For Verstappen, I guess he just has to dust off last weekend. He's still in a very strong position, 78 points to play for, still 14 points ahead. He knows if he drives well over the next 3 weeks and he can get his nose in front of Lewis Hamilton, he's still going to be champion. He just has to kind of put Sao Paulo behind him now.
He does, and actually we were speaking to him earlier in our press conference. It's our media day today here in Qatar, and we asked him, would you have done anything different? You know what's happening now, the Mercedes review, you've seen the onboard. And he said, no, I wouldn't have done anything different. It doesn't change anything. I was driving the car. I didn't need to see the onboard footage to know what had changed. I would do it again. We're fighting for a championship. This is how we race. This is what happens. We move on. That's it. And that's his approach. And to be honest, I don't doubt it either. Sometimes drivers come out and they say, I'm really taking it race by race. We saw it actually. Nico Rosberg was the king of this in 2016, and race by race, very much just only looking at what's happening in front of him. He was really struggling actually with the idea that this huge championship was looming over him, and he wasn't just going race by race. He was completely aware of this championship that was happening. And it was affecting him. But with Verstappen, I actually really feel like he's a much calmer character. He doesn't really show his big emotions like that. And I do really believe that he is just thinking, okay, well, that happened, let's move on. You know, I'm still in the lead, it's fine, it's still in my control, I can go out and win. These next 3 races are all perfectly winnable for me. So I just move on. And I do believe he feels like that.
Yeah, again, I can only judge on what I've seen on TV in the races in recent weeks, but he doesn't seem like a guy who gets who runs away too much with his success or gets too down about his defeats. Because, you know, even when everyone was hyping up the fact that, you know, you're pretty much on the cusp of the title after what happened in Texas and in Mexico, he was very keen to play it down. He was like, 5 races to go, 4 races to go. We're not counting our chickens at all within Team Red Bull here.
Yeah, he's a funny one on that side, because he said, I think it was Austin, he said that if I win this championship, my first one, it won't change my life, when obviously it will. But then after he won in Mexico, which was a great win, and the lead was extended out, I think he just got out to 19 points. And he was saying, actually, do you know what? Things are starting to look pretty good for me for this championship. And the language slightly changed, and he was allowing himself to think, well, maybe things are looking good for me. And then obviously what happened in Brazil last weekend, Mercedes was so dominant and Red Bull had no reply. But he just takes it on the chin and he moves on. And I'm not really sure where he is on that one, does he? He obviously wants to win it. There's absolutely no doubts about that. And he's certainly a fine driver. And if he doesn't win it this year, there are world championships in his future. But I think it will change his life, despite what he says. And I think he's close. He's so close. He's never been this close before. He's never been in this position before. And I think that's why Hamilton ever so slightly has the upper hand, because he's done this before. And not only has he won championships, but he's lost championships. He lost out in 2016 to Nico Rosberg, as I said. So he's been in this position, and he doesn't, Lewis Hamilton then came out and said, it won't change my life. So it's really interesting to see these two men at very different ends of their career and how they are approaching this business end of the season. Yeah,
two very different personalities. Two different personalities you mentioned, with Horner and Wolff in charge of their respective teams. You said they're quite different people. In what way do they actually differ in their approach then?
Toto Wolff is he's much more hands-off, I would say. So I'm sure you've probably seen the pictures where the pit wall, for example, during a race, Christian Horner sits on his pit wall, whereas Toto Wolff decides to sit in the garage. He always says to us he doesn't want to be responsible for touching a button that he shouldn't touch, or saying something and getting overexcited, although we obviously still hear him on the radio. And he very much takes the idea that you delegate out to people, you give them that responsibility, and then that's their job and that's how they do it. Christian Horner is much more involved. He sits on the pit wall. He's very much involved in the decisions that are made. And they just take a different approach to how they run their teams, really. And then I would say Christian Horner is maybe a bit more cheeky, plays the media a bit more, maybe, likes to throw out lines here or there, so knows a good headline, or, he's very, both men are actually very approachable in the paddock. You could talk to them. Whereas Toto Wolff is less, maybe courting of the media, shall I say. Although Netflix seems to have changed everything on their head, and everybody wants a piece of it, and everyone seems to be almost playing up to the cameras in a way, with the Drive to Survive that we now have, that documentary that's just been very successful for Formula One. So they clash, shall we say. They're quite different. Obviously Toto Wolff is from Austria and Christian Horner is British, and sometimes how they come together, it doesn't always mould. Yeah, you mentioned, like, everyone's talked about Drive to Survive and the impact that it's had in Formula One, and maybe a bit of a renaissance for the sport over the last couple of seasons. But crucially, those who are involved right now have to produce an interesting title race to keep the fans around. And, again, we're seeing another new venue with Qatar for this weekend. And this is something we will get used to eventually, because we wouldn't have had Qatar this year but for the Australian Grand Prix being cancelled. So in a way, they got one of their years a little bit earlier. They're not going to have a Grand Prix there next year because they've got the Football World Cup at roughly the same time as it would have been planned. And then we've got 10 years of Qatar to come after that into the early 2030s. This track, though, is kind of more known for Motor Grand Prix. We would have had the motorbikes happening since about 2004, 2005, but it's not necessarily a track that was engineered for Formula One here. Wasn't engineered at all for Formula One, and actually there's a bit of concern because the drivers were saying today again in the media day that they're not sure what it's going to be like. It's very fast flowing track, which doesn't actually give way to overtaking. You need fast straights which go into slow corners, heavy braking. You can sort of play around with the braking, try and overtake. DRS may go into it here. They actually had to change the entry into the pit lane because it wasn't suitable for a Formula One car. But just to very quickly go back to Netflix, I will say this, I was just down in the paddock and I saw that Netflix are with Mercedes this weekend.
Right.
And traditionally, when Netflix are with Mercedes, it's not a good weekend for Mercedes. If anyone can remember back to Germany, I think it was 2019, they sort of imploded, and Netflix were there to get it all on film. So it doesn't tend to go very well when Mercedes have Netflix in tow. So I don't know if that's an omen or not.
I wonder actually how much stress that adds to a team on a big weekend like this to have the cameras that close. Because look, they're going to have cameras around anyway for the live broadcast, but to genuinely have a production team embedded with you while you're getting ready for some crucial days of racing, that can't be an easy thing for the vast majority of the team, I would think.
No, and they're so embedded that they actually wear the team kit of whoever they're recording that weekend. That's how much access they get now. And you can, I have thought about this before in the sense that you're having conversations behind closed doors, and they're obviously very important conversations. They are pivotal to the weekend. You're discussing strategy, data, all these things that you do not want your rivals getting hold of or having any sniff of before the race, because obviously it would give them an edge over you. But then you've got these cameras, which obviously it's not going to come out until later in the year, or next year actually, as the season will. But they can look back on that and they can analyse it and see how you operate and what you did here and there, and then how you approach this track. And so maybe people are a bit more cautious with the conversations that they have. And these, I mean, the Netflix guys are absolutely amazing. You rarely know when they're coming, and suddenly you're in the paddock having a conversation, and the sound boom comes over your head, and there's a microphone hovering around you and camera, and it's just, you know, suddenly, and you do find yourself clamming up slightly because, you know, as I'm a written journalist, I don't prescribe to be on TV, but at the start of the year, as part of our deal to get our lanyards and sign up to be in the paddock, we just accept that they're there. But you do find yourself sort of closing down a little bit when you see them coming, or if, you know, if, for example, I'm talking to someone in the paddock and they think, oh, that might be an interesting conversation, and you don't really talk how you want to, I suppose, and as openly, because you know that the camera's there. So you know, that's tenfold when you're actually in the garage, when you're in the debriefs and you're talking in the hospitality. And so, yeah, it must surely affect a race weekend. How can it not?
Well, one other interesting point which I wanted to ask you about was Martin Brundle, my favourite trackside reporter, was doing a little bit of speculating when I saw him on the TV this morning, which is Mercedes had their 3 permitted engine changes. The reason that Lewis Hamilton had his punishment last week is because they made a 4th. The car seemed to be much improved in Sao Paulo, so that punishment paid off in a way, even if he had to come back from a difficult position. He was suggesting if this weekend doesn't work out perfectly for Mercedes and they're not the team who are in control, that they should consider for the last 2 races in Saudi Arabia and in Abu Dhabi to possibly even make a 5th change, because he thinks Lewis Hamilton is such a good driver that he could potentially come from 10th or 11th in the grid and win again. Yeah,
so it was his, in Brazil, it was actually his 5th engine that he took. So he would be taking his 6th. And when Mercedes did the simulations on when to take the engine, one of their options was in Saudi Arabia, but that's the penultimate race of the year. And they didn't feel like they could get the current engine that they had back in, as they were using in Mexico before Brazil, that they could get it to last that long. So they decided that they would take it in Brazil for many reasons. One being that it was a Red Bull track, that it was supposed to favour them. 2, that it's excellent for overtaking. And 3, Lewis loves that track. He kind of comes alive there. So, you know, you might as well roll the dice. There's still enough races to go within the season. So, you know, there's time to recover if needs be. What would have been much, much worse was if the engine had failed. They would have lost all the points, and then they would have had to take a new engine anyway, and then they would have had to start the next race from the back of the grid. So the points deficit would have been enormous. Saudi Arabia, one of the reasons they were speculating about taking it there is because no one's ever driven it before. But on the simulation, the suggestion is that actually it's a very good track for racing. And as he showed in Brazil, he's a very good overtaker. He's an exceptional racer. So there is an argument to be made for putting a brand new fresh engine in that car. And also on top of that, Mercedes are struggling with the reliability of their engine this year. The engines are all designed to degrade over time. Every single engine in the paddock, that's what happens. That's not unusual. But Toto Wolff has been really honest and come out and say for some reason their engine is degrading a lot more than they were expecting, and they haven't quite worked out why. So the engine that Hamilton took in Brazil, that will, when Max Verstappen said it will naturally come back to a level which makes it other teams can compete against it. But perhaps maybe if it does degrade too fast, as Brundle was saying, then they may decide to make Lewis Hamilton have a bit of a tougher Sunday in Saudi Arabia and put a new engine in his car. It's not outside the realms of possibility.
Well, it's not going to be just the drivers who decide this championship. The engineers are going to have a key role over the next 3 weekends as well. If you want to watch the action unfold in Qatar, you're going to have to show your commitment to Formula One and get up in the early hours of the morning for qualifying and for the race on Sunday. But it's one to look forward to. Rebecca, thanks a million for joining us here on Off the Ball.
Thanks, Will.